How do civilizations collapse, and what does science fiction tell us about it? Hi, my name is Christian Malte. I'm a writer, philosopher, musician, and a lifelong science fiction enthusiast. And today we'll be talking about movies about the collapse of civilization and/or collapse of society. It's mainly the same thing, only the scale changes. And we'll be doing it by going through a list of 7 movies that illustrate different aspects of how we think about civilization collapse and generally what it looks like. I didn't put any post-nuclear stories in there. Every post-nuclear movie essentially shows you a movie about the collapse of civilization, but in post-nuclear movies, usually the emotions are different from a social collapse movie. Like in post-nuclear stories, usually it's either a horror or grief and loss, essentially, or a mixture of both. Like Thread is obviously very big into the horror. When the Wind Blows is horror and loss and all these things. But that's more the focus. Like it's about the nuclear Armageddon itself. That's the topic. And civilization collapse is usually just a byproduct of that in those movies. Whereas here, we're looking at movies where the social collapse is the topic, and these movies have a different set of emotions, and that's what we'll be, exploring today, because those emotions, I suspect, are pretty close. That's what's close to what we're feeling right now. So, okay, without further ado, first movie on our list is Mad Max from 1979, like the original classic by George Miller, obviously, with Mel Gibson. And the thing is that when we think about Mad Max nowadays, we usually think more about like the Road Warrior, the second one with the desert wasteland, and Thunderdome is still in that imaginary world, and Fury Road and Furiosa. All these movies are in the wasteland, like they're wasteland movies and post-nuclear movies, but the first one isn't like that. Okay, so the first one is there's no apocalypse, and in fact, it's never stated if anything happened at all. All we know in the beginning is that, you have roving gangs of lunatics that are racing along the highways, and gangs of bikers. In the movie, they have Honda bikes, and that's, as George Miller said, because they couldn't afford the Harley Davidsons, which are too expensive. But they should have been essentially Hell's Angels, the toe cutter gang, essentially. And so you can tell right away that plenty is wrong in the society, because you have, when you see the Hall of Justice, the sign is falling apart and everything is falling apart. They have the corrupt cop is looking, he's a voyeur and he's looking through the sniper rifle scope. He's looking at a couple having sex. And why? Incidentally, because it's an Australian exploitation movie. So they always have sex scenes and male and female nudity. So that's a reason why that scene is there. But it also sets the tone, because you have this not very in shape, cop who's one of Max's, colleagues, and he's looking at this couple having sex in the field. So he's not quite professional, right? So, but the general idea is that those madmen are roaming the streets. But what is strange about this movie is that you clearly get the sense that things have unraveled, but there's still gas, obviously. Towards the end, Max goes on a vacation, and things feel kind of okay during that segment for a while, at least. There's ice cream. They're having ice cream. So if you think about it, there's one scene where, toe cutter is eating the ice cream of the whatever. So there's ice cream involved in the movie. So if you have ice cream, that means you have refrigeration. Like if you're selling ice cream cones, well, you could, nobody makes cones at home, right? You have to have somebody who made them, and maybe there's an old warehouse full of ice cream cones from before the collapse, but nobody is selling a warehouse full of old pre-collapse ice cream. Like somebody delivered that ice cream recently and they put it in the fridge, and it's so what does that tell you? There's electricity and the roads are still working, for commerce. There's oil, so there's money, so there's a semblance of society there. You can see that things are falling apart, and the madmen are not quite in charge, but almost. Like the cops are barely hanging on, and everything is falling apart, and their cars are falling apart, and they're trying to fix their own like police cars with threads and chewing gum. But there's still a semblance of order, and things ultimately feel kind of normal. This is the thing, except that now the Hells Angels are in charge. There's a train station, so I'm not sure if we actually see a working train in the movie. I don't remember. But there's still a guy in charge of the station, and we see train wagons. So it's presumably the trains are still running. So there's a semblance of society, and it mostly looks like ours, like normal 1979 society. But yet you clearly get the sense that things have collapsed, even though things mostly look the same and things mostly seem to be working. So next movie on the list is the Quatermass Conclusion from 1979 also. This was the TV miniseries that concluded the Quatermass Experiment series. So as you might know, Nigel Kneale, who also wrote this, was a brilliant scriptwriter. Well, he wrote the original Quatermass TV series, and then that was made into a movie by Hammer Studios, and which launched Hammer Studios as we know them. Essentially, it was their first big success. I think this was before Terence Fisher's Dracula. Anyway, it was certainly one of their early, huge, massive successes. So Nigel Kneale wrote two other stories, Quatermass 2 and Quatermass and the Pit. These were also made into quite brilliant movies by Hammer again. And 10-15 years passed, and ultimately Nigel Kneale wrote a final chapter to the stories of Quatermass. So this one is really interesting. Because, okay, so Nigel Kneale is a very smart guy. And usually what he'll do, he has kind of like a Lovecraftian sensibility in the sense that there's very often supernatural elements that are strongly involved in the plot, but they always have a scientific explanation, like a quote-unquote rational explanation. It's usually aliens, right? Usually it's space aliens or evil mad scientists building robots, right? Here the story is about like England has collapsed, and I do think you get the sense that it's global, it's planetary, in fact. And by the time the movie begins, the Quatermass was in charge of the British space program in the 50s and 60s. That's what the movies were about in the first three movies. By now, he's no longer working there because there is no more British space program. There is barely any British government at all. You have pockets of London that are still controlled by some form of government, but and you still have electricity, and you still have TV stations, which some people can pick up. But by this time, Most of London is controlled by roving gangs of lunatics, old lunatics, like retired lunatics, if memory serves, and the countryside is being roamed by hordes of evil hippies. Like the kids have become possessed by some form of strange collective desire to destroy civilization and destroy everything that is scientific, and they are attracted to anything that looks like Stonehenge, like megalithic structures, and they're called to that to those structures, and they cross the country, and from time to time they have kind of rituals, and they're chanting and they're dancing, are space hippies, and they are they are essentially disintegrated by space aliens when that happens. Okay, cut a long story short, they see it as being taken by the aliens to their spaceship, and they see them. I don't think they see them as aliens. I think they see them as like a benevolent race of demigods, and even if they're aliens, ultimately they are in their minds a race of benevolent demigods, and they have come to like a rapture, essentially. The aliens have come to pick them up and to free them from this land of in their minds, in the hippies' minds, land of evil, anti-environment, destruction and so forth. But the thing is that what's interesting is that, so Quatermass is looking for his granddaughter or his niece, I think, and she's been like possessed by this cult, and you see her across the movie roaming in the countryside. As a side note, you also see Toya Wilcox, like the famous singer. She's certainly famous in Great Britain, and she's also married to Robert Fripp, which is mainly how I know her, from King Crimson. And she has a relatively important role. Like, she's one of the hippies, so that's cool. But yeah, the hippies are mainly evil, and this is. What is revealing about this movie, essentially, like this miniseries TV movie, is that this shows us societal collapse as we imagine it, essentially. Like, it's the story of social collapse, traditionally, at least for a long time, we wanted to tell ourselves. In the sense that, what causes the collapse? Well, the refusal of science. Like the evil anti-science obscurantism, essentially. The evil space hippies. And there are a lot of, essentially Richard Dawkins-like monologues, like plenty of scientists who are supposed to be good guys and, sympathetic. I did not find them sympathetic. They're very preachy, and they're very screamy, and they're going on about science is good, everything not science is bad, and you're superstitious, and you're stupid, and you're destroying everything. And there's not a whole lot of nuance there. And there's certainly no idea, really, that there might be anything wrong with the social order, that there might be anything really valid about criticizing, environmental policies or lack thereof, so forth. You get the sense that Mr. Niels, and I like Nigel Kneale a lot, but he's great. Like, he's a brilliant guy. He's very sensitive. If you've seen the Stone Tape, another TV movie with paranormal ghost investigators, like, that's fantastic. That's truly a fantastic TV movie, like movie in general, which is shot for television. But he's pretty dogmatic, essentially, is what comes across here. And the interesting thing is that the evil here, like, it's tied to the Celts. And this is not a trivial detail. And I'm mentioning this again because we're seeing the way people fear the collapse of civilization in a society like the real life Great Britain that produced this movie as a TV movie in 1979, like in real life, okay? This is the product of the mind of Nigel Kneale, and it's responding to his own sensibilities. And this is how he sees the collapse of civilization. This is the point here. And his idea is that you have superstitious hippies who are destroying science. And why? Because they are brainwashed by evil aliens and who are returning to destroy the earth, and the hippies, because they refuse science, are actively about to destroy the world. So science good and superstition bad, which is a lesson we've all been taught. But also that the Celt thing, like, this is not an accident, because Nigel Kneale also wrote Halloween 3. And he refused to put his name in the credits because he didn't like the changes that were made. But I actually like Halloween 3 a lot. I think it really holds up well. But not to spoil it too much, but the idea is that it's about an evil scientist who wants to avenge the Celts. You know, he wants to sacrifice the children of the English world to bring back the freedom of the Celts. You know, because Celtic, like Celt nationalism, if you like, but the expression of Celtitude, to use a barbarism, that's evil. That is bad. Celt, bad. Okay. And this is really interesting because, right, like, nobody cares, you know, like nobody, like the Celts are a non-entity in the global conversation. I like them a lot. I care about them, but no one ever brings them up. And this is a British movie, and Great Britain, the United Kingdom, is made up of 4 countries. There's England, the land of the English, and which they did not come from originally. And then there's Ireland, like the land of the Irish, who are Celts. And then there's Scotland, where the Scots live, and they are Celts. And then there's Wales, and where the Welsh live, and they are Celts. So you have Great Britain. And all 4, you have 4 countries, the United Kingdom, all these people living in happiness and joy together. And 3 of them are Celts, and 1 of them is English, and everybody is happy, and everything is great. And but strangely, in Parliament, they speak English. They do not speak Celt, and or Gaelic, right? And strangely, the Prince of Wales is not Welsh. Strangely. And there's a thing here because what I see in Quatermass conclusion is like this idea of, science is good, being against science is being against the good and is being evil. And this is directly tied for Mr. Kneale, who is a smart, sensitive person who I like a lot. But this is directly tied in the sense of in the mind of this man with the evil Celts, who are superstitious, evil, children sacrificing, anti-science people, you know. And hang on to this idea. Because and then I'll move on to the next movie, because in terms of what is seen here, it's those other people are destroying civilization, but my civilization is good, and we would all be friends if you would all just do what, like, why are you upset? Why are you trying to destroy everything that I've built, which is based on objective truth, which is science? And accidentally, science is always on the side of justifying what I do, if you read Tarzan, Tarzan is about the scientific superiority of the British nobility. That is what, if you read it, is what Tarzan is about. Like, evolution proves that the British nobility is superior. That's why Tarzan is so powerful, right? Essentially, like that, and he was brought up by gorillas, but he learns to read by himself because he's a British noble by blood. That's in the text. That's in the text, and the Tarzan books are fun, but that idea, you can even find it in Michael Moorcock, or who's an anarchist, right? So that idea, it's very omnipresent. If you read H.G. Wells, science is always on the side of the British Empire. And that matters. So in this context here, this idea of collapse of civilization, which is what we imagine still societal collapse would look like, even in non-English countries, because of the power of the English world for the last 300 years, and because of their, because of Hollywood and the internet, because that culture, because of Tarzan and all these stories. Well, we have grown accustomed to these ideas, and we have come to lose touch with the fact that what's implied and in these stories, and often very explicitly stated, in fact, not implied but stated, is that science is on the side of the British Empire, and everyone who disagrees is evil, and only the resentment of the of the conquered people who do not agree that everything is now great, and conquered by the minds of space aliens, only space aliens, and the resentment of the superstitious conquered and vanquished peoples, only that could could cause the collapse of civilization. And science is great. Science is good in that context. So that's for Quatermass conclusion. It's really quite surprising if you look at it and if you pick up on those ideas. So next one is Interstellar. And this one is a lot closer to what societal collapse feels like, and for one reason. So you'll remember that, so Interstellar, the Christopher Nolan movie, you'll remember that at the beginning of the movie, the world has grown out of crops, of things to eat. There's been a disease, and it's spread by wind, essentially, and it destroys every growing thing. And there's no more wheat, no more barley, no more oat, no more rice. There's only one crop left that people can eat. And even that is slowly dying. And by the beginning of the movie, the disease has spread to that very nutritiously poor crop. But, we're about to run out of food, essentially. Now, it's not explicitly stated in the movie. I don't think so. They certainly don't make too big a point of it. But why is there such a plague amongst the plants? Well, they're coming from the same society. Like, it's set in our world, just a few years in the future. And this is the world of, capitalism and monoculture and, industrial agriculture. And we have seen in this world for the last 70, 80 years, the oceans getting emptied, and we all know that, and the vegetables and the fruit. I read, for instance, that the bananas when we buy them in the supermarket now, the species we buy is not the same species as 70 years ago, essentially. Because the one we used to have was much better and much sweeter, and it was just better. But it died. It died because of monoculture, because it was more popular in the supermarkets. Farmers started growing only that, and farmers in many cases controlled by, big corporations, obviously, but they're not evil, they're not bad, they're not good. I'm not blaming the corporations. That would be, evil anti-science, socialist propaganda. That would be bad. So I'm not blaming them. But it just so happens that they grew those bananas, and because there was only one sort of banana, when one gets sick, they all get sick, and they all die, and that species died. That variety of banana no longer exists. It's like the dodo. It has ceased to be. And so that happened pretty early on. So they took the next best variety, next sweetest, and did the same thing. 6 months later, they all died, and they moved on to the next one in the list. And they've been doing that for 60 years. And from what I understand, not only with bananas, but with a lot of things. Like now we have seedless grapes, which are great, I guess, and because of, mixing the species and maybe genetic engineering, but maybe not, maybe just, crossing varieties, whatever. But so we do have a few more varieties than before, but generally speaking, a lot of vegetable and animal species have gone, and that's what we have in the movie here. And yeah, it's bad, but who worries about this? Who cares about this? When was the last time you heard about it? Do you have time to care about it? Yeah, and in the movie, but that's not the detail. That's just the setting. The detail that really feels like societal collapse in Interstellar is that the government has mostly, it mostly collapsed, I guess. Certainly NASA has disappeared, and there's still electricity, there are still trucks, people still have shirts that they buy at the store, and they still have baseball games, at least local baseball games, but they have media. So most of the trappings of civilization are still there, most of them. But you do get a sense that things have got pretty downhill in terms certainly of the government, if you like the general structure of society. And the big hint you have is one of the main characters is at the baseball game, like the softball game with their kids, and he's talking about, I think it's the Matthew McConaughey character, and he's talking about NASA, because I think he used to work there. I haven't seen it in a while. Forgot to rewatch the scene before the video, but you know that scene. And he's talking about NASA casually like that, and his friend, his like a neighbor, the mother of one of the kids, she looks at him with this face of disdain and almost, barely held hatred and contempt. And she says something like, NASA never existed. It was a conspiracy. It never happened. Only the bad people talk about NASA. And she's so sure of it. And you might, there's there's a lot of division right now in the discourse between so-called the left and the right. And certainly in the States you can see it. And I'm not in the States, so I'm looking at it from outside. But this sort of a certainty of certainty without having checked, certainty of knowing because everybody says it, like this common sense of stupidity. How exceptional is it? And does only one side do it? And it seems to me that it's pretty prevalent on all, and everywhere really. Like in people just repeat stuff they read online or in forums, and if you watch Reddit, if you read, any Reddit, or the comments on YouTube or whatever, and even the people who are pro science, even the Richard Dawkins fans or people like that, and dare I say, even those people themselves, like Sam Harris, and I kind of like Sam Harris. I certainly, at certain times, I thought he was saying interesting things, but like on consciousness and whatever. But if you look at the foundations of what they're saying, there's a lot of that, you know. Of course, I'm right, and you're just stupid because you don't believe like me, and there's a lot of that going on. So and that's just not conducive to a well-functioning society. Like, I don't care about the facts because I'm right, that thing, and I get to decide what is a valid fact and what isn't. And besides, like in the case of the movie in particular, uh, we all know that the reptilians are in charge of the White House. We all know that so and so. We all know that this and that, um, and when I watched Interstellar and I saw that, I felt a sense of dread. And because, again, I recognized that. I had seen a lot of that around me all my life, and on television, internet. So, yeah, that sense of, yeah, NASA never existed. There was no moon landing, stuff like that. So, moving on to the next one. Next one is, yeah, with forgot one important thing about Interstellar. Science saves the day in Interstellar. And not to spoil it, but, well, I will spoil it. I will spoil the end in the general solution that is found. So in 3, 2, 1, humanity finds a way to move off Earth. They establish a space station around Saturn, essentially, and they live in this tesseract, and so it's in 4 or 5 dimensions, and yeah, so it's a multi-dimensional, spacey, timey-wimey, future physics kind of science fiction, multi-dimensional space station. And that's the solution. They leave Earth, and humanity is saved. They're going to build a colony on Saturn. But Earth is dead. Earth has died. And this is not, lamented in the movie. Like, humanity has survived. That's the thing. But humanity destroyed the Earth, and why? Well, because of the economics, right? Because it was profitable to do it, and it was comfortable to ignore the consequences. That is what destroyed the Earth in the movie. And why? Because it's the same planet, and this is what has happened to us. It's the same thing, But in the movie, that part of the equation is just brushed over. And yeah, so here social collapse looks like the common received wisdom is just beyond the pale of ignorance and stupidity. But is it really that much more beyond the pale than our everyday, like what we're used to, even for many years, what we've been used to? And if they are going on this other planet to do exactly the same thing they did here, I mean, how's that going to work out? And the last thing I will say, that now for real for this movie, is they're going to Saturn, and this all feels very scientific. And again, science is on our side. Science is good. I love science. And I loved Interstellar, like, very, very much. I love this movie very deeply in essentially all possible ways. But still, I mean, they're going to Saturn, and this movie is presented like almost like a hard science fiction movie. Like it's realistic. The physics feels real, and the mathematics, like the physics of the time dilations and all that stuff, and that's very scientific. It feels that way, and the computer, like the robot, is very odd, but it looks like something that might actually be scientifically doable. And everything, like the spaceship, the space station, obviously is very futuristic, but everything looks very scient-ish, scientific-ish, right? Scientific-y. But that thing at the end with the Tesseract, it's a magic trick. I mean, it makes no sense. It makes sense on paper. It makes sense as a puppet show, and I understand it. And yeah, the Tesseract, the other dimension of space, and yeah, sure. But in real life, you're not going to build a space station because your daughter found new laws of physics, right, and save humanity and go into space. You're just not going to do that. And the key thing is that, and the reason really that is because the detail I don't mention is the radiation in space. Like maybe they found a way to magically cross the imaginary dimensions that they made up for the movie and covered it with a layer of tech talk, like Star Trek technobabble, which is what it is. It's just what it is. It's pseudoscience, and I have no problem with that. It's a science fiction movie pretending to be scientific, but that's all it is. It's all good, but it's not real science. Okay? But the radiation part, I mean, look it up. There is no way for human beings even to go to the moon without dying of radiation, 20, 30 years later. For the moon, okay? Like they check out the astronauts, they went blind, and many of them had cancers, apparently. Like we don't think about the radiation because the movies don't talk about them. And what we know about science and space comes from the movies. But that Mars colony, it's impossible. The people would just die and go insane while they're going there because, anyway, because it's psychologically very difficult. Right? So, but certainly, like the radiation, there is no technology that protects people from the amount of solar radiation that is found outside of the very close proximity of the Earth's atmosphere. Again, check it out. Just do a couple of Google searches, and you'll quickly observe what I'm saying. That is scientific and well documented. And but when we watch the movie, we're reacting. I mean, again, I love this movie, but it's a fairy tale. It's a beautiful fairy tale. It's an impressive fairy tale in many ways about science, but it's a fairy tale about science. It is not science, right? But we watch the movie, we do not see the fairy tale. We do not see that the radiation thing makes the whole thing impossible. And we look at the science with the Tesseract and we think, well, I'm just not smart enough to understand it. But you can't understand it because it's all hand waving. And again, it's a magic trick. It's vague, vague words that sound scientific to evoke the idea of science and future science and future physics and to sound serious. But that's all it is. And it's fine because it's a science fiction movie. That's what they are. But it's nothing more than that. So here there's a correlation, and now I'm moving to the next movie. There's a correlation between the blindness of the characters in the movie and like how come we don't how much more astute are we than the woman in the baseball game in regards to our own understanding of the science that is being presented in the movie, you see, which seems sound to us just because it's like the science in the TV shows and the movies we watch. Anyway, next movie, High Rise, 2015. Now we're really entering into hardcore social collapse stories. This one is by Ben Wheatley, a director I like a lot, and stars the very good Tom Hiddleston, who not only plays Loki but knows ancient Greek, so scores points in my book, and written by based on a novel by J.G. Ballard. Ballard, brilliant writer. His main focus is usually about kind of social collapse, and the thing is that so the movie is set in the 70s. If you haven't seen it. And it tells the story of a futuristic high-rise that is built by this brilliant architect in the 1970s, and only the very rich and the best are invited to live there. But it's still set up hierarchically. Okay, so yeah, only rich people are invited. Okay, but rich people starting at the level of news, like television reporters, for instance, or doctors, people like that, and they live like on the first sort of floors of the building, and as you move higher and higher in this high rise, eventually, but when you reach the top, you have people like essentially royalty living there. And the thing is that this is a self-sufficient complex, and there are 5 of them. We only see one, like the inside of one, but there's 5 of them, and they have very futuristic, malls and grocery stores and fitness centers and all these things. Like it looks great, and it's only the best, and it's truly a utopia. And obviously, it devolves into barbarism and cannibalism and Lord of the Flies type of scenarios. And I don't think like the movie doesn't work, but it comes close, right? And so the movie will show us the Tom Hiddleston character as he moves in and gets to meet the neighbors, and you will see he gets to we get to know the different people who live in the block, and we see the conflicts growing between the different factions, and we see like the class warfare essentially between like there's a new class warfare situation that erupts in this high rise, and ultimately, as I said, by the end of the movie, people are eating dogs on the fire, and throwing people off the top of the building, and there's garbage everywhere, and it's like horror and madness. And they're cool with it, and they like it. And Ballard is very good he's very good at displaying like the psychology of these people, and of showing like, okay, this is actually our world, essentially what he's saying, like, and this is what's coming, but like 2 minutes from now, and this will be perceived as something both strange and natural, essentially. Like if you've read Crash, for instance, with the car crashes and people having sex, like the Sex and Car Crash book, and there's also the Cronenberg movie, but they're comparable. Like it's a perfect adaptation, but it's kind of different in many ways from the book as well. They do different things. Like the movie begins where the book ends, I think Cronenberg said. But like in Crash, this idea that we're in this new strange world, and we're exploring this like almost I'm tempted to say, I mean, it's just odd and off-putting and strange and like disgusting, but also fascinating, and all these things. It's like we're growing. It's very Cronenbergian. It's a reason why he made Crash. Like it's like when in Shivers, Cronenberg is telling a story about an evil parasite, but the parasite turns people into sex beasts, and it sucks your blood. But essentially, the parasite is the good guy in Shivers. Ultimately, the blood-sucking, benevolent tumor. And that kind of sensibility and of tone is very comparable to what you have in High Rise. But when I say that it doesn't work, I mean, I didn't think emotionally it hit what it was trying to hit. But it does show you a perfect society collapsing into barbarism. But so there are two things to say quickly. I will be brief about this one, about High Rise. Is that, first of all, the moment of collapse isn't shown. And that was the main problem I had with the movie when I watched it, because I was expecting to see a moment where, tensions rise, and then something happens, and there's a murder maybe or something like that, and then things quickly escalate. But the way the movie shows it is essentially things escalate, but there's a montage sequence in the middle of the movie, which is about 1 or 2 minutes long, something like that, just a quick, and then 2 minutes later, there's garbage everywhere and people hunting in the corridors. So it just goes from, it goes from 1 to 11 in 2 minutes. Like, there's no slow build-up. It's a slow build-up and then bang, you're in the hardcore Lord of the Flies situation. Kind of like when Anakin turns evil in Revenge of the Sith, right? He just pops a fuse and just starts killing. Like, it wasn't well prepared. So the thing here is that I thought it was a weakness, but now I'm not so sure. And I'll come back to that idea later. Because there is no inciting incident that causes societal collapse. And that's what I missed the first time I watched it. That's the point, actually. It's just time and the slow erosion of, the social contract, if you like. But that's a haughty-taughty way of talking about it. Just, people start having sex in elevators while other people are there. That sort of thing, right? Like the loss of, and often you feel like reactionary people say that. It used to be better in my days, and people are always complaining about, the how young people nowadays don't respect their elders and stuff like that. And it's kind of true that it's been decades that people have been saying that. But, first of all, it's true that we said that about, like, we have found Roman inscriptions of Romans saying that, like these kids nowadays. But you will recall that Rome was decadent. Rome collapsed over a long period. And, so the general idea here is that it's not necessarily that, what is it? We'll go on with the other movies, but clearly it's not as simple as saying that, for those who are old enough to remember, Murphy Brown is having a child and there's no father, like she'll raise the child as a single mother during the George Bush, Dan Quayle era. I get dating myself here. And at that time, Vice President Dan Quayle, who was not renowned for his wit or depth of reflection, he started this polemic about how Murphy Brown was bringing down civilization because she was a single mother. And you see that in conversations. People say that sort of thing. And, feels stupid, sounds stupid, but how wrong is it really? Obviously, if it's just one thing, it doesn't matter. If you're on a diet and you eat one Oreo, it's like, 75 calories, won't kill you. But if you eat one Oreo 30 times in a day, every day, starts to add up, right? So it's a general idea here, and that's actually what the movie, I think, is trying to convey once again. It's not one single thing, it's an accumulation of things. But the thing, and then I'll move on to the next movie, Uh, a thing which is interesting is that this is a British movie, and there are a lot of movies from Britain which are concerned with like social collapse, essentially, th- like in the English speaking world in general, that's a theme I have certainly seen in a lot of science fiction movies from the general English speaking world. And there are a few from other countries. I'll mention a few in a moment, but it's more like it feels more like even like an English from England preoccupation. Like they seem to have a more um, strongly held apprehension about that, and I think that's sincere. And what I would say quickly is that this matters. I mean, because it's like English people have a culture. They have a certain way of talking about it and seeing it, but like the the general culture that conquered the world with the British Empire, right? Like it wasn't the Irish and it wasn't the Scots and it wasn't the Welsh. Right? It was the English people who conquered it. I'm not speaking Gaelic right now, right? And they had a long history of like quite brutal, you know, civil wars and and I read Hobbes, Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan, and that sense of, first of all, of strongly, deeply rooted class distinction, very rigid class distinctions, which you don't have in the States, obviously, not in that same way, but you have, I think, still in Britain, which is very much represented in this movie, in High Rise. That's what you have, this idea of a rigid class system, and this idea that, man is a wolf to man, which is straight out of Hobbes. Well, obviously, other people have said it, other cultures have said it, other philosophers have said it, but that is really, 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 really deeply ingrained in English culture. And again, most of the science fiction movies we've had in the last 100 years, most of them come from the English-speaking world, like certainly during the Cold War era. So that's the culture we've had. That's a big part of the narrative we've had, and I think we're missing something there, and which is not mentioned in the conversation, which is this is precisely that. This is the empire that conquered the world and that believes that man is a wolf to man, and it's just common sense, and we need to you need to rule by fear and terror because man is a monster, and if left to his own devices, he will, become a madman, like in Mad Max, and people will start eating each other, like in High Rise or many such movies, like Lord of the Flies. Lord of the Flies is a very, English, British way of seeing life, And again, other cultures have come. I'll talk about one in a moment. That exists in other cultures, but not everybody has it as a major theme that keeps coming back across the centuries, and that is very prevalent and it is very deeply rooted. And I think people from other cultures usually we see it, but we barely pick up on how deep rooted it is. And I think if you're from that culture, I'm not sure if one gets the impression that it's so deeply rooted as a belief that it's just taken for granted, like a normal, like it's just truth, like common sense. And the very idea of common sense, with that expression, we had something like that with the Greeks, ancient Greeks, but they didn't valorize it. They didn't think it was, an indicator of absolute truth, But that also exists, like in the English-speaking world. So I think all these factors combined, they are part of the unstated ideas and principles that are active in the world we're in now because up until very recently, um, the English-speaking world was running the world. And now, I think, yeah, and now society is collapsing. Society is collapsing, and what does the English-speaking institutions and like, what is that? What is the summit of the imperial pyramid for the 300 previous years? What are they doing, and how are we seeing it? Since our way of seeing the world as communicated in these movies has been so dominated by that way of seeing the world, that common sense, that universal truth that comes from a very specific culture where it is held as a deep-seated belief that man is a wolf to man and the whole thing. And people become monsters, as I said. So moving on, but that's what we're seeing in High Rise, right? We're seeing the imagination of what a world in collapse looks like, but from the point of view of the English culture, which is usually the point of view we're seeing. And because that point of view has brought us to this point in history, because they were running the world for real, like the real, it's just what it is. Okay? Well, if that way of seeing brought us here, like in Interstellar, and we don't see it, what type of solutions are we likely to find? Are we going to go on Saturn and ignore the radiations? So next movie, only three left. Richard Stanley's Hardware. I'll be quick because I've spoken a lot today, so I'll be quick for the next ones. I love Richard Stanley. He's kind of crazy, but very cool. And this is his first movie. First movie. It was sold as a Terminator ripoff, but it's a lot more than that. And essentially, there's a dystopian society on the verge of collapse in London, and I think it's London, and everything is horrible, and the environment is a mess. But in this city, we have a young couple, and one of them is an astronaut and his friend, and they've come back from a mission. And the astronaut he buys a souvenir from a salesman, like a roaming salesman, like a door-to-door salesman. Except the door-to-door salesman finds bits of scrap metal in the desert wasteland, and this one is a Terminator, essentially, the head of a Terminator who can rebuild himself, and it's a machine that was designed for population control because so she will fight against a Terminator in her apartment, essentially. And many crazy things happen in this movie. But the thing is that I included it because there's tons of cool stuff. You have cameos by Iggy Pop. He's the DJ on the radio. You have Lemmy. He's driving the taxi on the Thames River, like he's piloting the boat and stuff like that. The visuals are trippy. The Terminator injects you with a hallucinogen like LSD when it kills you, so you have visions of God. Or many very creative things happen. But there is a dictator in the movie, and I watched the movie many times with the audio commentary because he's a fascinating guy, Richard Stanley. And you briefly see him in the movie, but there's a dictator I think he's in power in the movie, but he's not yet fully accessed the full range of dictatorial powers. He's in power, but he's not a full dictator yet. And becoming a dictator usually always takes some time. It's not a one-day thing. You get elected president, right? And then you get you start amassing powers, and you ignore this law and that law, and it's a build-up, and it's a process. And it's like a process of people getting used to it and people feeling overwhelmed and various degrees of complicity and all these things. And but the thing is that I included it because Richard Stanley described it in the audio commentary as a pre-apocalyptic movie. He said, there's obviously something really bad about to happen in this universe, but we never see it. It's just, we feel it, the hints are there. And if you watch Dust Devil, which is more a horror movie, but which is actually my favorite Richard Stanley movie, I love that movie, Dust Devil. There are connections, especially towards the end, where that same apocalypse is coming. And like the global collapse and the form of global collapse, apocalyptic event, if you like, which is hinted at in Richard Stanley's movies, it feels very much like our own, right? And I'm not an apocalyptic kind of person in that sense, but okay, killer robot AI, which is what we have in hardware. Right? Killer robot AI, which will be sent along the border for immigration reasons and will just start killing people and, dictators and, the everyday normalcy of seeing a guy becoming a dictator. And I think this is something which is, it was very prescient by Mr. Stanley. And the error one encounters these days is that it's only like people will blame, plenty of people blame the current American administration, but it's pretty easy to pick on one guy. But if you look around across the world, it's not left. Everybody's doing it, left and right, and the Labour government in Great Britain, they boasted last week that they would realize the panopticon across the entire United Kingdom. Like everybody will now be watched 24 hours, 24/7, and whatever, no matter what you do, online, offline, everybody will now be spied on, and it will be great. Like in Big Brother, like in 1984. And look across Europe and even in Canada, it's all the same thing. Yeah, and there's a hint there, an indication, and the environment is totally collapsing, right? The economy doesn't work, right? And and so the leaders are putting on these surveillance programs, and you have to provide your passport to access the internet, essentially, or they're writing the laws or passing them like very quickly right now to protect the kids, obviously. So how different is that from what we're seeing in Richard Stanley's hardware? Most of it is there, right? And again, I mentioned it because there's no single point in time you can point to. There's no apocalyptic moment in this movie where you can say this happened or that happened. Surely, yeah, there's an apocalypse coming, maybe, probably. But that guy, Bulgakov, I think his name, dictator, there are, posters for him to be elected on the walls, and that drone in the desert, and that wasteland. Like, what created that wasteland? It just, all these things accumulated over time, and it's just normal. People are just used to things happening, and there's not one single event. Okay, so you can kind of see where we're going here. So has society collapsed in hardware? There's electricity. You have VHS players. You have electronics. You have a space program, but it's not really working so well. Maybe fraudulent, Um, but you have government-sponsored marijuana, right? So pot, cigarettes. So yeah, progress. Things feel like they're still working, but yet there is something that feels very dystopian, like it has collapsed already, essentially. Yeah, so yeah, it's a long, drawn-out process. Next one is Stray Dogs. Stray Dogs is our sole Russian movie on the list. So this was made at the tail end of the Soviet era in 1989. So one of the last science fiction movies made in the USSR. During most of the Soviet Union, you couldn't make a dystopian movie. The censors didn't like it, so the way propaganda actually worked in the USSR, it wasn't so much that the state would tell you what to do, but it was more that you would make your movie and they would pay for it, and if they didn't like it, they would pull it from the screen and hide it on the shelf. There was a lot of that. But by the 1980s, and by this stage, Gorbachev is in power, and he's trying more or less to liberalize at least that part of it, and of the USSR, and so he gives more leeway for the movie makers to have less optimistic messages, and before you had to show a future society, not communist, like not Soviet, not the USSR is in power, but a future society usually where people live in peace and where we're no longer limited by competition and capitalism, but almost like a Star Trek thing. I mean, there was a lot of that. Long story short, by that time, you can make a dystopian movie, and Dogs is a quintessential dystopian movie. It's hyper nihilistic. Essentially, you're in a collapsing society, and a kind of corrupt minor bureaucrat, hires a bunch of mercenaries, but some of them are quite incompetent, alcoholic, stupid, former soldiers, but all sorts of incompetent people. And they are sent in this desert wasteland, environmental nightmare, to shoot wolves, but they discover that they are in fact man-eating dogs. And they get killed off one by one. And, if you've seen that movie, forget the name, but with Donald Pleasance in Australia, where that guy there's a guy who arrives in a tiny Australian village in like 1970, and he has a flat tire or something like that, and he can never leave. He's stuck there, and the atmosphere is very brooding and decadent, and no matter what he does, he can never leave that. He's trapped by the moral decay and the inertia of the place, and like the moral quagmire of the place. Well, Dogs is a lot like that. And it's a very powerful movie. It's very, as I said, nihilistic. But the thing is that I put it in science fiction because it's a desert wasteland, industrial, environmental catastrophe, corruption, everything falling apart, horror story. But I watched it and it's great. I do recommend it if you're into nihilistic stories. I mean, that's a good one. I watched it, but it's not a science fiction story. It's about the Soviet Union in 1989, and they shot it on the location of a real environmental catastrophe, and what you see is exactly what it was like, except for the killer dogs. So why did I include it? Because I do count it as science fiction, but kind of like high rise. It's science fiction because our real world is now science fiction. You see, it's science fiction because it has all the elements and all the trappings and all the tropes of the dystopian, Blade Runner environmental collapse story. Yeah, again, the morality of it and the incompetence of it and the stupidity of it and the horror and the terror and the despair and the gloom. But it was a contemporary suspense movie. So your mind reads it as science fiction, but it's not. And why did I include it? Why did I include it in this list? Because how can you tell? Again, same thing. Okay, it looks like science fiction, but it was real 30 years ago, almost 40 years ago, and I don't think things have gotten a lot better. And is it only in the Soviet Union or former Soviet Union, or like how's Michigan doing? How's Detroit doing? Moving on. It's interesting also because this is another empire. Obviously, the Russian way of seeing things or the Soviet way of seeing things was pretty different from American or British, English way of seeing things. But there are a lot of similarities. It's a different cause, but it's the same corruption ultimately. Honorable mentions. Four of them very quickly. George Romero's The Crazies. Always thought it was a poor knockoff of Night of the Living Dead. It's a brilliant movie. Right now, my favorite Romero movie. I mean, I haven't seen Martin yet. There's a few I haven't seen. But as much as I love Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, masterpiece, as much as I like his other movies, this one is arguably his best one. And why? Because it's kind of like 28 Days Later. You have quick zombies. So they're infected people. They're not zombies. But they were infected by a government chemical weapon experiment. And if you look around, like on Wikipedia, not a conspiracy site, if you look on Wikipedia, there's, hundreds and thousands of examples of experiments on civilians and prisoners and their own soldiers that these people do, like on a regular basis, essentially. So it's not that far-fetched. but The Crazies, the effect is that it turns people into murderous fiends, but it's really about the collapse of social norms and society, and everybody does their best to contain the crisis, but everything keeps getting worse and worse and worse, and it's extremely powerful and uncompromising. And I do think it actually goes too far in a couple of instances, and Romero is always trying to push the envelope in his movies. And if you do that, sometimes you will go too far. But there's one scene in particular it's pretty but it's a total masterpiece. It really handles that the despair and the panic, but that sense of that feeling of watching social norms collapse. So that thing, The Crazies. Same thing with Life Force, the Toby Hooper space vampire movie. There are space vampires. They arrive in London, and there are three of them in the beginning. And when they bite someone, that person becomes a vampire, but after 24 hours. Essentially, within 24 hours. And they do the math and they realize that it will take something like 2 weeks before the entirety of England, or certainly London, has been vampirized. And that's what you see in the movie. And it's an exponential curve. And it's far from a perfect movie. It has a lot of issues, but it's truly excellent. And the vampirism, you see the effect it has on people, and it truly transforms them into moral monster, because all they can think of is, yeah, I need to suck the blood now. And I need to say anything or do anything to get the blood. Like they're drug fiends, essentially. Like, like the level 1 million of the worst caricature of a drug addict you can imagine. And these are people like the prime minister becomes like that, like people in suits and ties. So that sense of like the true horror of the moral collapse. Okay. That is what Life Force really pulls off. I have seen very few movies handle that part as well as that. And visually it's very cool. And it's, again, lots of problems in the movie, but there are things in there that very few movies dare to do, and what it does succeed at doing, it pulls off really magnificently. There's a lot of nudity as well. Just be forewarned that the main space vampire, she's a very beautiful girl, but she's naked like 80% of the movie. But even that is really interesting, what they do with that. Anyway, Life Force, Moral Decay, very powerful movie. Aniara, obviously, I did a video on that. So this is, I think, a Swedish movie. Danish or Swedish. And same thing, comparable in ways to Life Force or The Crazies, in that you have a spaceship. Earth is doomed for war because of wars and environmental catastrophes, as we've talked earlier. And they are moving to a Mars colony, and they have a very luxurious spaceship. Their life will be hell on Mars, but at least they will be alive. So they're building their colony. So we have a bunch of, like, thousands of colonists on this very luxurious spaceship, with, again, shopping malls and activities for the kids and the holodeck, and it's a dream. Like, it's like the most magnificent cruise ship you can imagine. And you have all these refugees in that spaceship, except there's an accident in the beginning, and the spaceship is veered off course, and it's sent to the blackness of space. And they try to get back, but they never do. And it's told over a long period, like 20, 30 years or something like that. So you will see all the ways that society, you will see the social collapse over a long period in that very extreme set of circumstances. And that is another quite nihilistic movie, even more so than Dogs, arguably the most nihilistic movie I've ever seen. But it is a total masterpiece. It's a 2018 movie. There are other versions. I'll spare you the details, or watch my longer video on that specific movie on this channel. I'll give you more of the details. But as a portrait of the different ways people react to social collapse, and just how dark and dire things can really get. Aniara is a very grueling experience, but a very good way of exploring that. It's a very, again, truly a masterpiece. One of the best science fiction movies of the last 30 years and of all time, really. And the last movie, quickly, in the honorable mentions, is Le Dernier Combat, so The Last Combat, or The Last Fight. And this is a more fun movie, a lot more fun, in fact. It's Luc Besson's first movie from 1981, I think. And this is like the French Mad Max, essentially. And it feels like a bande dessinée, like a European comic, you would call like a, but like obviously, as you probably know, European quote unquote comics, they're not at all like American comics, which I like a lot. Like I used to have a massive comic collection, but they're more on the it's more highbrow. There's a lot of lowbrow stuff and very popular stuff, but there's a long tradition of, you know, like the heavy metal magazine used to be like that, Metal Hurlant and so forth. So it feels like an old bande dessinée, right? Like Mad Max seen through the eyes of a Belgian or a French comic and a comic book. And it's a silent movie, so there's no dialogue. There are two words exchanged, and the idea is like it's this future, this like post-collapse, post-apocalyptic, essentially movie. But the apocalypse wasn't a nuclear war; it was that people became mute, and you have the effects of that. So, so again. It's in the honorable mentions in part because it's a post-apocalyptic story, but also because of all the movies I've mentioned, this one is really fun, and it's just a goofy take on it, and it's from France. So you have a lot of movies from England and the States, and you have one Soviet movie and one from Scandinavia. So it's fun to compare and to see the way all these different cultures, which is what they are, you know, all these different cultures express those ideas and play with those themes. But last movie in my list is a British movie. It's not well known, not well respected. It's not good. I will say it out loud. It is not a good movie, but it does one thing spectacularly well. Okay, which is why it's number one. Which is dealing with, like, showing the reality of social collapse. That movie is Memoirs of a Survivor from 1981. It was directed by a guy named David Gladwell. Essentially, it was his first real feature length fiction movie, and also his only one. I mean, his credits on IMDb are a bit confusing. But from what I've seen, he did documentaries and other things, but this killed his career. It was his first real movie, like fiction movie, and it killed his career. He didn't do a good job. He didn't direct it really well. It didn't work. The financing didn't work. Many things didn't work in this movie. And there's a very interesting interview with the director of photography where he mentions the problems with the movie, which you can watch. It's like 10 minutes. It's on YouTube. It's interesting. But it has a couple of things going for it. And as I said, one key brilliant thing, which is key for our topic today. So it has, it's based on a novel by Doris Lessing, first of all. She of the Nobel Prize, of the multiple, she's one of the few writers who wrote serious novels, if you like, as well as lots of science fiction novels. Like not many people can pull off doing both, and she did, and she won a Nobel Prize. So there aren't many science fiction writers who won Nobel Prizes. And Julie Christie stars in it. She's one of the qualities of the movie. She's not as well known today, but she's in Demon Seed, and she's in Fahrenheit 451, I think, and plenty of excellent movies. And for a while in the 60s, 70s, she was one of the most well-known, well-respected actresses in the world, and there's good reason why. She's fantastic. She's terrific. I discovered her these recent years. I didn't know really her too well, but she's an amazing, very powerful actress. So she plays the main character here, and the story is about society collapsing over a period of many years, and the Julie Christie character is only referred to as D, like the letter D, as in Doris. And she's observing this. She essentially doesn't do anything. She just watches. And at the beginning of the movie, she's forced to take on a lodger, like a teenage lodger. And at first you think it's going to go catastrophically wrong between the two of them, but not really. They end up getting along pretty well. What happens is that there are people fleeing the cities and they go to the countryside and no one ever sees them again. And everything is falling apart. And you have, the subway stations, there are no longer any subway trains, and they're filled, the empty subway stations are filled with cannibalistic children who just hang around there and who attack the little old ladies, to steal their purses or to eat them, during the day. And you have rows, kind of like in the Quatermass serial, you have rows of mostly teenagers, but people of all ages, really, like just fleeing the cities. And it's strongly implied that there's a lot of bad things going on because there's no order, there's no anything. But people are fine with it. They're just, they're careful. But one of those gangs, the young leader of one of those roving gangs decides to stay because he falls in love with the roommate of Dee's roommate. And he decides that he's going to save all the orphan children. So he builds an anarchist commune. And because society is slowly falling apart over the many years that this movie takes place in, eventually, they rebuild a form of local economy. It's very, if you've been to an anarchist fair or something, it's kind of their dream in many ways. Like it feels like that, and it for a while it works well. You have workshops and sharing, and everything is pretty cool, except that. It doesn't last that long. The movie is about how that's just not enough, and there's a lot of illusions and self-delusion in that, in the way that he does it, essentially. If you've seen Grizzly Man, like the Herzog documentary, made with the video that a man shot of himself with grizzly bears, that movie, and eventually the bears ate him and his girlfriend, but he spends years talking to the camera and rambling about the evil of capitalism. And you can see there's something wrong with him, and he's compensating, and there's but he means well. I mean, that dichotomy, that unease you have of someone who's trying to do good but very flawed. That's kind of what you have with this guy here. So in the beginning of Memoirs of a Survivor, there's still electricity. The subway doesn't work anymore, but you have electricity from time to time, and you have television and the news from time to time when you have electricity and stuff like. There's some form of media. There's some form of barely functioning government, mostly seems like a citizen initiative. People have uniforms, but it feels like something like government collapsed, but people are keeping it together with with duct tape. Essentially, is what it feels like. But by the end of the movie, all that has collapsed essentially, and Dee, she starts seeing visions of a Victorian family. That's the other thing, and she might be going insane, or maybe there's a strange time travel thing going on. It's very surreal. And I'm guessing that in the novel it works better than the movie, because this is one of the things that the director doesn't pull off. It doesn't really work, but you can see thematically that it's there. And one of the interesting things is like the sexual repression, because there's a very troubling scene. That one works well. It's not subtle, but it works well. There's a very, 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 very troubling scene about sexual repression during the Victorian era. And this is contrasted with the way our young, idealistic young man behaves. Because yeah, he's saving all these children and teenagers, but yeah, he starts dating, let us say, like he starts by dating the roommate, like Dee's roommate. But she's like 17, 18, and he's with her like for a year or something. But eventually he tires of her, so he moves to a younger girl, and he keeps doing that. And each time they get younger, right? And there's a scene eventually where that roommate girl is talking about that, and the other, so she's talking to this woman, and the woman says, well, how old is his new girlfriend? And she says, still old enough, like for now. So it's a bit, uh, you know, I guess you could say gross. But the thing is that that's the thing about social collapse. You know, this guy, at what point does that become acceptable or stuff like that? At what point does any of it become acceptable? And so, because the big lesson in all of these movies is the same: is yeah, if you're out of it, if you're sufficiently distanced from what is shown in the movie, in terms of what you're seeing in your everyday life, yeah, it feels horrible. But the process that gets you there is this slow attrition of whatever it is that holds, you know, society and working utilities and just social norms in general. And it's never just one thing, but it is an accumulation of things. And the one thing that the movie really pulls off, Memoirs of a Survivor, the reason why I put it at number one, is because it does magnificently succeed at displaying the normalcy of it, the everyday banality of things slowly disintegrating. And yeah, one day little old ladies are being kidnapped by cannibalistic children, but what are you going to do? And yeah, and they're walking by barricaded streets. So there was one day, years earlier perhaps, where they barricaded those streets because it was the patchwork decision they had to make that day to keep things barely functioning, you see. So it's always that things collapse and we adapt and we move on. But as we adapt, where I'm getting at is that there is no one single moment, as in High Rise. You see, that was what I missed when I watched it. There is no one single moment when you can point to and you say that is the moment where it collapsed. All you can say is look in hindsight and look at where you're at now. And yeah, things still operate. There's still like in Mad Max, there's still a police station, there's still roads, there's still ice cream. Like at the beginning of Memoirs of a Survivor, there's still television, like in Hardware. We're sending people to space, like Interstellar, playing baseball. We have pickup trucks. Everything is kind of normal. But all societies that have collapsed are like that. This is what those movies show us. And they get there by ignoring the numerous compromises that everyday good meaning people make just to function. Like the small compromises, the small practical things. Turning a blind eye to this, and which is why I mentioned the imperialism thing. Yeah. So, has society collapsed? Well, you tell me. But I'll let you figure it out. So that was it for today. After a collapse, there's usually a renaissance. But we have to rebuild on stronger foundations, like saner foundations. And maybe those science fiction movies will help us, figure those out. Till then, hope you're doing fantastically. Keep watching the skies. Live long and prosper. Take care.